Welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. I'm Bill Benson, and I have hosted First Person for 25 years. Each month, we bring you firsthand accounts of survival during the Holocaust. Each of our first person guests served as a volunteer at the museum. Please send us your questions and let us know where you are watching from in the live chat. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Louise Lawrence-Israëls share her firsthand account of survival with us today. Louise, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to be our first person.
Thank you for this warm introduction, Bill, and I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you, Louise. And I know you have so much to share in our 1 hour together. We'll go ahead and get started. Louise, before you tell us what happened to you and your family during World War II and the Holocaust, please tell us about your parents and their life in the Netherlands before the war began.
My parents were just starting their life together before the war. And my father worked for his father. They worked together. They had, my grandfather owned a large textile firm. They manufactured clothing and they had a chain of stores where they sold it, the clothing they made. It was a really good life for my father and his father. My mom was an artist. She was also a fashion designer. And anecdotally, my granddaughter had inspiration from one of my mother's designs for her wedding dress.
Oh,
So
nice.
still alive.
Very nice.
And they started their life. My mom was pregnant before the war. And they really did not expect the Germans to come and invade their country. The Germans were our friends. They used to vacation in the Netherlands, and why would they come and invade a friendly country? But they were very wrong
Yeah.
with their thoughts.
Louisa, did you have a large extended family?
We had a fairly large extended family. I can't tell you very much about them because most of my family did not make it. They were killed during the war, and I was born during the war, so I never knew them.
Right, right. Louisa, World War II, of course, began in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Your father was called into the Dutch army that same year, and then Germany invaded and occupied the Netherlands in May 1940. Please tell us what you know about your father's experience serving in the Dutch army.
My father was a reserve officer, so he was mobilized, but so were all the men 18 years and older. The army was not very well organized, very well trained, but they thought with the threat after Germany invaded Poland, maybe they should train. And my father was stationed at the most southern point in the Netherlands, close by the river Meuse. And that's a big river that is actually a natural border between the Netherlands and Germany. So my father's battalion trained, and one of the things they trained for is just in case the Germans would approach, they would blow up the bridges over the Meuse River to try to stop them from coming in. But when it actually happened and they did blow up the bridges, the Germans were so ready with their rubber boats. They crossed the river and came into the country anyway. They took my father and a lot of his military colleagues prisoner of war. But Holland capitulated. We lost so many lives in the 4 days that we actually fought, that we capitulated. We could not win. And the Germans let the officers go back to the Netherlands. They occupied our country. We were part of Germany. And they figured, well, they can't do anything anymore. We're going to let the officers go back. And we can use the space for other prisoners.
Yeah.
So my father came back.
So he came back home. And Louisa, tell us about the anti-Semitic laws that were passed by the Nazis soon after their occupation.
Yeah, it took it a little while after they occupied my country. And then gradually they instilled all these um, orders. That one of the orders was that you could not walk through a park, you could not use public transportation. Jewish children could not go to a regular school; they could only be educated by a Jewish teacher. A Jewish doctor could not treat regular people, but a regular doctor, not Jewish doctor, could not treat Jews.
Mm.
So, and the same thing with dentists. So life became um, restricted and more
Mhm.
difficult.
Mhm. And of course, your father had, this very successful business. What happened to that?
Right? Every successful Jewish business was confiscated by the Nazis. So one day you owned it, the next day you were on the street, you did not own it anymore. It was just taken away from you. What was difficult because my father had a family, he had a wife and a son, and I was on the way, and he had to make a living for us. So after his really nice life and nice income, he became a pants presser at a small Jewish dry cleaning place. But he always said he went to work whistling or singing
Mm.
because it was a job and he could provide, could buy milk and bread for his family. And that was more important than anything else.
Tell us what your father and your grandfather did with some of their valuable religious items.
But also, one of the orders was that Jews had to hand in their valuables. Um, what were valuables? Savings books, cash, jewelry, gold, silver, cameras, bicycles, copper, tin, anything that was valuable for the Germans that they could send back to Germany and they could use for the warfare. So my father discussed with his father what they should do, and they hid a lot of valuable things. They buried them in my grandparents' backyard, and they also buried anything that had to do with religion, like prayer books, prayer shawls, kiddush cups, anything with Hebrew lettering. They buried because they were hoping that if they had a house church search, that if they did not find anything Jewish, they would leave them alone.
Mhm, mhm. Your parents moved to a town called Harlem, which was west of Amsterdam, where you were born. Tell us about Harlem.
Haarlem is the capital of the province of North Holland. It's not too far from Amsterdam. It's a lovely town. I don't know anything about the town except that I visited later, but I was born there and I moved away from Haarlem when I was 6 months old. So, but Haarlem had a nice size Jewish community. They had Jewish schools, they had a Jewish hospital. For a Jewish family, um, even with all the restrictions, you could still live there. So
And
it was,
here we
yeah,
see a scene of a street in Harlem.
correct.
Yeah. Louisa, before we continue, I'd like you to know that we have people that are listening to you today and watching you from all over the country and other parts of the world. So today I'd like to say hello to those of you who are viewing from Arkansas, Ohio, Arizona, and North Carolina. And we'd like to welcome our viewers in France, Israel, Argentina, and Germany. So a lot of eyes on you from a lot of different places today, Louisa. Shortly before you were born in July 1942, the Germans began systematically deporting Jews from the Netherlands to killing centers in German occupied Poland. Life also became much more restrictive for Dutch Jews when they were forced to identify themselves with a yellow Star of David badge. Will you tell us what this was like for Jews, including your parents, to have to wear this?
This star had to be worn by everybody, every Jew above the age of 6. So I have no memory because I was not 6 in that time. It was a difficult thing to do. You could not leave your house. It has to be the star had to be sewn on your outer garments, and it singled you out. It was a big thing, and even if people had known that you were a Jew, it really singled you out. And I always get the question, why did people wear it? The problem at that time was that you did not know who you could trust. We had collaborators, and there was an incentive for collaborators to turn in a Jew.
Mhm.
So if somebody turned in a Jew, he or she would get money, but you didn't know what the consequences were of not wearing a star, what the punishment would be. And that's why people wore it.
One of the things that I was really struck by that you shared with me, Louisa, is that you were forced to have a very meager ration for purchasing cloth to make clothes, and you were forced to use some of that ration to purchase these yellow stars.
Yeah, that was a textile ration you had to use. So if in case you needed something else, you couldn't buy it because you
Mhm.
were forced to buy the star. Yes, that's right.
Your family was very close to another Jewish family who lived on your street in Harlem. Tell us about them.
Yeah, it was the family, a very religious family. The father of the family was the president of the Jewish congregation in the town of Harlem. You see my mom's friend on the left side in the front. Her name was Selma, and the other faces that are singled out were her parents. I guess this was before the war. They were on a cruise ship,
Mhm.
but there you see them. The family had 7 children. They were all about my parents' age, so around 30, but they were not married. Some of them were engaged, but nobody was married. They were all home. They were all professionals, but they had no job because they were Jews.
Mhm.
Selma, my mom's friend, had been a teacher, and of course she was let go. She did not teach at the Jewish school, so they were home. They were still celebrating the Jewish holidays. Also, a set of grandparents. The father's parents lived with them, and 2 unmarried aunts.
Mhm.
Um, Selma, to have something to do, used to cross the street quite often and give my mom a hand with her 2 small children.
And Selma's, of course, as you point out, circled in the front row on the left.
Correct.
Yeah. Tell us what happened in January 1943 that had such a major impact on your community and on your family.
We had a very active underground or resistance. We called it underground. And the underground had shot a German medic in the town of Harlem. The next morning, as punishment, the Nazis took the 10 most prominent Jewish men and killed them in front of the population. Salma's dad, as the president of the congregation, was one of them. He's the third from the left, and the rabbi is the one with the beard all the way on the left. So these men were part of the congregation, and they were killed. What was a huge shock because it was really, I think, the first active killing in my town of Harlem.
Mhm. So these 10 men these men we see right here, all of them were executed in the aftermath of that, including Selma's father.
Correct.
Yeah. I just have to note you had mentioned, Louisa, how large and prominent the yellow Jewish Star of David was. And there, of course, you can see it so prominently on each of these men. What when they were executed then, what did this mean for the rest of the family that were your neighbors across the street?
Um, well, of course, they were full of sadness and sorrow, but a few days after Selma's dad was executed, she was again in our house. across the street from our home, and she heard and saw a large truck stop in front of her house. There was a lot of screaming. People jumped off the truck and they kicked in the front door, and they rounded up her whole family, her mom, her grandparents, her aunts. There were some cousins visiting at that time, and of course her siblings. Um, she saw the truck drive away, and sad to say that she never saw her family again, except one son, one brother, later on escaped.
Mhm.
He escaped and survived the war.
You also shared, Louisa, that another brother had actually taken off when the raid came, but he returned.
Yeah, he had promised his father to take care of the family, so he felt guilty. He was able to escape, and I guess he found a back door in his yard, and he escaped. But he came back,
Mhm.
and he was deported, of course, with the rest of the family and executed,
And executed.
murdered. Yeah.
And Selma witnessed this whole thing happening across the
Yes.
street. Yeah.
Yes.
Is this when your family, with Selma, because she's now with you, when your family and Selma decided to move to Amsterdam?
Yeah. We didn't really decide that. We had orders before to
Mhm.
move to Amsterdam. When the deportations started and they were well on their way, the the Nazis gave Jews orders to move to Amsterdam. They tried to make it easier on themselves and not have to go to all the little towns and round up Jews, but to just have everybody concentrated in Amsterdam. My parents did not follow that order right away, but after Selma's family was deported, um, my father thought the next truck could stop in front of our house. So that same night, we moved to Amsterdam. And I always wonder, but there's nobody left to ask how we did that. I
Mhm.
know that we had help from people from the underground, and my father had some really good friends. Some people in the resistance were also people that he had been prisoner of war with. Came
Mhm.
back, and they were really good Dutch people, and they joined the resistance. And they helped us. They also emptied out our house and stored everything that we had, what was a good thing, but that comes later in the story.
Right. And once you were making that move to Amsterdam, your father was able to obtain false identity papers for the family. Do you know how he was able to do that?
Again, through the resistance. And to get false identity papers at that time is not so easy. Today, with computers,
Mhm.
I don't know what the difference is if I see a real driver's license or a fake driver's license. But at that time, it was difficult. We did not have the means that we have today. So you had to use chemicals. So there were usually chemical specialists that set themselves to make fake identity papers. Yeah.
And not only was the underground resistance doing things like that, they also were taking some action to slow the deportation of Jews from the Netherlands. Will you tell us a little about that?
They helped Jews find hiding places. They sabotaged a lot of the German orders. Um, they worked against, very much against everything that collaborators did and that Nazis did. It was hard for them because they knew that if they got caught, that could cost them their life.
And one of the things you've shared with us, and we have a photo of this, is they were able to destroy really important records. Say more about this.
Yes. So this is a record office, and Holland kept, or the Netherlands kept really good records. Records from birth. Within 24 hours that you were born, you put down, the first name, last name, address, religion. Everything was on these little record cards. So the resistance tried to destroy the record offices, and this is a record office in Amsterdam that they destroyed. They set bombs to them, or they set fire to them. And of course, if they got caught, they were severely punished.
And I'm imagining the information was probably on index cards, and just looking at this image that had to be hundreds of thousands, if not more, of
Correct.
those index cards destroyed. What a courageous thing they were doing.
Yeah.
Your family, your father and your family then were seeking and found a more permanent hiding place. Will you tell us how that came about?
My father had studied in Amsterdam, and the headquarters where he worked with his father was also in Amsterdam. He knew Amsterdam really well. And of course, he had help from people from the resistance. But he found a 4 flights walk up storage attic. And this is the row houses where we were all the way on the top, where you have that little indicator and the white area. But my father thought the good thing, this housing set was right across the street from the main park in Amsterdam, the Vondelpark. And my father realized that he would have to go out, try to make contact with the resistance, try to get food, medicine, or whatever else we needed. And then to have somebody who is clandestine living somewhere go out at night and be seen by people. So there was less chance to be seen because there was a park across the street.
Mhm, mhm. Before we go on, Louisville, I'd like to remind our audience to please share any questions that they have for you through the chat feature. And we sure hope that our viewers will be sending you some questions. Louisa, you were around 6 months old when your family moved into the attic space that we just saw in that photograph a moment ago. Please tell us about the move and give us a sense of what that attic space was like. And as you pointed out with that little arrow, it was four stories up there.
Correct. So it had their own staircase going up, for their own entrance. In the attic, there was a toilet that you could flush. There was a little sink with cold running water. Um, there was not much else. There was a table and chair stored there. There was a cupboard, and there was a broken down couch. So it was really of the essence to take as much as necessities as they could. And with the help of the resistance and my father's friends, they took mattresses for the adults, a crib for me because I was only 6 months old. My mom took a camping stove. If there was anything to cook, it was done on a camping stove. Um, they took as many warm blankets, as many warm clothing as they could. Um, they just thought that, the more they could bring in, the better it was. They had no idea if it was going to be for a day, a week, a month, a year. And we happened to be there 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
So that's a very long time.
Yep.
Tell us about what was your family's life like in the attic during that 2.5 years you were there?
So my parents, I always say, gave us, my brother and myself, the biggest gift that you can give. They wanted us to have a normal upbringing, as normal as possible in those circumstances. So they never talked about the outside world. They never talked about their fears, for family members or friends, or fears of surviving. They just wanted us to be loved and have a good life. And they succeeded. We did not know what was going on outside the place that we lived. We did not know what the outside was. They never talked about it. If the sun was shining and my mom had said, I wish you could take your kids to the park, we would have asked, what is a park? And we would have missed it. They never talked about it.
Mhm.
So my brother and I, were happy children. Yes, we were hungry. Yes, we were cold, but we thought that was normal. And we also thought that everybody lived the way we did
Mhm.
because we didn't know difference.
Right. Louisa, tell us about this lovely photo of you.
Yeah. So always handmade clothing made by Mom and Selma. I'm just sitting on this broken down couch. My brother and I use that a lot. And as you can see, I'm a happy child.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a very sweet photo.
Yeah.
Before we go on, I'd like to share a question that was submitted to you, Louisa, from Joy. Joy asks, how did your parents manage to keep young children quiet while in hiding?
Children mimic everything that they hear and see. So if there's no yelling in the house, children don't yell. Yes, we did cry if we fell and hurt ourselves, but then there were three adults that could grab us and soothe us and take us on their laps. Um, I I don't think that my parents really made an effort to keep us quiet, but we were just quiet children.
Hmm.
We did flush the toilet, and I am absolutely sure that people that lived below us heard it, and they must have been really good people. They did not turn us in. They didn't help us, but they could have turned us in. They could have had money for that, and they
Mhm.
didn't.
That is quite a statement in its own right, isn't it? Yeah. Louisa, before the war, your father had been a collector of art objects and other fine objects that he came across. Turned out that was important to your survival. Will you say something about that?
Yeah, I always say it was not Rembrandts or Picasso's. They were small things, and most of it was were stored by his friends. So he used his collection to trade for food. So he actually bartered for food. So a beautiful little Chinese bowl could maybe bring in half a loaf of bread. There
Mhm.
were always people collecting, and there were always people that wanted to get rich or get more out of the war, and they succeeded. But on the other hand, it was good for us because we could eat.
Mhm. Your father, of course, was the one who had to go out from that fourth story. He had to go down those stairs and out in order to secure the necessities that you all needed: food, medicine if you needed, fuel for the little camp stove that you had, and also to barter away the items that you've just described. That had to. I know he didn't talk about it, but that had to be terrifying for him. Later, did he ever talk about how
He
scary
did.
that must have been?
He did. And he said he was always very scared. He always said he was the scared one, and my mom had the courage of a lion. That's
Mm,
exactly how he said it. Because my mom was straightforward and she just did what she thought was right for the family. My father did what was right for the family. He had to, but he was always scared.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And tell us about a particular encounter that he did have on one of those forays outside of where you were staying.
Right. So he told me this much, much later. Not too many years before he passed away. There was a lot of talk going on about police helping the Nazis and police brutality against Jews. And my father always said, well, I have another story. My father had to go out during the day, probably to get medicine for us. And at a certain point, he was pushed into a portico in Amsterdam and he was scared to death. He thought, this is the end of me. Somebody caught me and this is the end. He heard a lot of noise around him. And when the noise was over, this person walked away. This person was a policeman. So, what was happening, he told me, there was a roundup in the area. The policeman saw this person going in a long black coat, going close to the buildings, uh, hesitantly walking, and he figured, maybe that person shouldn't be on the street. So he pushed my father aside and actually um, protected him. Um, my father never spoke to the person. I guess he couldn't speak. He was so afraid. But the person walked away, and my father was able to do what he did.
Mhm.
So there's another story. There are also people that were good and tried.
And one of the things that you just shared with us in that story is that there were times when your father had to go out when it was light out, like to get medicine that you couldn't obtain at night. Did anyone else in your family with Selma, did anyone else ever leave that attic space in that time, or was it just your father,
Just my dad.
just your dad?
Yep.
Despite the just extraordinarily difficult circumstances that you were living in that attic space, in July 1944, your family decided to have a celebration. Tell us what your family was celebrating.
They were actually celebrating my second birthday.
Mhm.
My father had gone out again, and when he came back, his face was a little different. They had apparently always very worried faces, but we were used to that, and we didn't know that. But my brother picked up and said, "Papa, your face looks different. What happened?" So my father told a story that my brother and I had no idea what he was telling, but he was actually telling Mom and Selma that he had heard that the Allied army had landed in Normandy. He said, and here you see the Allied army landing in Normandy. It
Mhm.
wasn't so easy. They lost a lot of lives, and there was a lot of fighting because you can imagine the Nazis were not very happy by a liberation army. But my father figured the shorter time that we have to stay in the attic, the better it is because there might be a time that we are betrayed. So he was very hopeful and he wanted to celebrate, make a celebration, and they picked my second birthday. A celebration is difficult when you are in hiding, so they really prepared it.
And tell us about that celebration.
So mom made a dress out of an old blouse of hers. Selma made a dog, sorry, a doll out of rags that she had. You see it in my arms. And my brother had one toy that you see by my feet. That was a little wooden pull horse. And I was always allowed to look at it, not to touch it. But he wrapped it and he gave it to me on my birthday. But he did tell me that it was just for the day. I had to give it back at night. I figured, okay, I could play with it. I'm sitting on a little wicker chair that was antique that I also got. It's a doll. It's actually a doll's chair, but I was so little that I could sit in it. And then I have socks and shoes, and the shoes are way too small, but just to be complete for the picture. So there's somebody from the resistance that took this picture, and he said if she survives, she will have the picture. And I
Mhm.
always say
I want to
his.
dwell on that photo for just a moment more, Louise.
So the picture, I always say, is a special tribute to my parents because you see a very normal 2-year-old
Yeah.
with not a worry in the world.
And what's in that photograph, of course, is there's so much in there. The toy that your brother gave you for the day, the dress that was made for you, the little doll that was made for you, and the chair that was a gift. That's just it's just an amazing photograph. And if we have time later, you might say a little bit about the fact that you, for the most part, went barefoot. And one of the things I had never thought of, you in that time, as you're growing, you could never go out and get shoes to fit your feet. So we might get back to that. Louisa, we have one more photograph of the chair. Tell us about this.
So the chair, besides my brother's toy and my doll, was really one of the very few things that we had. We were rough with this chair. We used to climb on it. We used to throw it at each other if we were angry. It was a step stool for us. This the chair after the war was pretty damaged, and my mom there was no option to get rid of this chair, so she had it repaired, which you can see on the bottom. I had it with me for many, many years. And I talked to our daughters, and we decided to donate it to the museum. And it's now in their permanent collection.
Was there anything else that you had with you that you were able to donate to the museum later in life?
Yeah, I donated prayer books, a prayer shawl, and some other artifacts that were actually buried. I donated to the
Yeah.
museum. Correct.
And of course, late in the war, here you are in this fourth story attic space, and there were air raids on Amsterdam late in the war. They must have been particularly frightening for your parents. What do you remember and what do you know about those air raids?
The air raids were very piercing sounds. It sounds almost like the fire stations that are checking their sirens once a month. Uh, if a plane approached Amsterdam from either side, from Germany or from the Allied side, from Great Britain, um, an fire and piercing alarm would sound, and that was a sign for people to go into a shelter. That were usually basements. We couldn't go. So my father knew that the strongest part of an Amsterdam row house was the staircase. So we had a routine. If the alarm sounds, we would tiptoe, and my father would open the door. We would sit on the staircase. Mom would have a basket with emergency stuff in it, emergency food. Selma would have some blankets, and we would sit there till the all clear alarm would sound. And that's a sign for people to move back to their houses. And we tiptoed back into our place where we lived. Um, it happened sometimes 12 to 18 times day and night. So you can imagine going and lying in bed and being nice and warm, and there goes the alarm again. But we had this routine. We never object to it. My brother would hold my hand. We would tiptoe to the staircase.
Hmm. Just trying to imagine that multiple times, sometimes in a day, you would have to get up, go into the stairwell, but you're still in a stairwell in an exposed building while everybody else around you has gone into shelter. So it just had to be so terrifying. One thing you did share is that you remember seeing bomb buildings where the staircase was intact.
Yeah, after the war, we did see that. And
Mhm.
when I realized what we had been doing and why we had been doing it, I realized also those staircases were still standing, but no roofs.
No.
So the roof
Mhm.
would have fallen on us, and we probably would not have made it anyway.
Right.
It was just the thought to do something when the air raid alarm sounded.
A few moments ago, Louisa, you mentioned, of course, you had a toilet in the space, and when you flushed it, no one, basically informed on you because they had to have heard the toilet. In that whole building, we saw is a fairly large building with multiple units. So I'm guessing that others had to know that somebody was up in that attic space.
Yeah, you can, if you ignore it long enough, you don't believe it anymore. And I
Mhm.
think that might have happened. But it's a good thing. You, on one hand, you can say, well, why didn't they help you? But I think it was better that help came from afar. If somebody had rang their doorbell, some collaborator or a Nazi, and said, are there people there up in the attic? They could go, no, because they didn't know us. If they had known us and liked us, they would have had to lie about it. And when you lie, you give it away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really good point.
Yeah.
Louisa, in late 1944, Allied forces fighting against Nazi Germany made their way to the Netherlands. Your father's hope that it might be shortened looked like it was being realized. The Allies were coming. They were on their way to liberate the country, but they were forced to stop short. What prevented the Allied forces from getting to Amsterdam and to rescuing you?
When they crossed the border into the Netherlands from Belgium, we had an early onset of a very severe winter. And when they came, to the rivers, there are three large rivers. The largest one is the Rhine River. Um, the rivers kind of cut the country. Below the rivers is 1/3 of the Netherlands, and above the rivers is 2/3 of the Netherlands. They came and the rivers were frozen, and they realized they did not have the right equipment to cross three rivers. So I guess the generals decided that the Canadian army would be camping by the river, and as soon as the rivers would thaw in the spring, they would cross the rivers. They would get the right equipment, cross the rivers, and liberate the rest of the Netherlands. While the Allied army, in the meantime, would liberate eastern Belgium and go into Germany.
Mhm.
So here you have people dancing in the streets in the southern part of the Netherlands, waving Dutch flags. Food is coming in, and we have 8 more months of severe winter, occupation, and hunger, and we used to call it the hunger winter. There was nothing. The Germans, the Nazis, had closed all these supply lines, and the winter crops were frozen because we had such an early start of the winter.
This hunger winter, 1944 to 1945, as you just said, it was exceptionally harsh winter. You're occupied and extraordinary food shortages. And here you have the Allied army a ways off, but unable to get there. How did you manage to get through that winter and the next 8 months?
I don't know how my parents did it. And my father had some emergency food. When the southern part of the Netherlands was liberated, he asked, or he traded for a lot of sugar, flour, and butter, and he baked cookies on top of a camping stove. And he sealed them in tins. That was emergency food. There was so much butter in those cookies that they could sustain you for a little bit. But I also remember, uh, really remember, being so cold that my brother and I um, had a condition called chilblains. Hands and feet were so terribly painful because of the cold that we actually cried. There
Mm.
is a cream, or there is a medicine for it, but that was not to be found anymore. It's harder for my father to get out. But my father remembered that in the 1930s, um, farmers that feed their livestock in the winter had also chilblains. And they used to put their hands and feet, or whatever had chilblains, into cow or horse's urine, because the uric acid in the urine is the same stuff as what is in the cream, and it takes care of the pain. Since we didn't have horses or cows in our attic, my father made us pee pee in a potty before we went to bed and put our hands and feet in it, and the pain went away. We could go to sleep without pain.
Okay.
Nobody told us that it's disgusting. Nobody told us it's a yucky story. We just did it, and it took care of the pain. And I
Mm.
remember that very well.
Wow. I also recall you telling me that at one point, because the food was so short, your mother tried to see if you could eat tulip bulbs.
Correct. We got tulip bulbs, and she made tulip bulb stew, and it felt very good in the beginning because we had something warm in our tummy, and we had something in our tummy, except it didn't last long. Tulip bulbs are poison. They're not edible, so they left our bodies with terrible cramps.
Wow. Mm.
Yeah.
On May 5th, 1945, Canadian forces were finally able to reach you in Amsterdam, and they liberated Amsterdam. You were now 3 years of age. Tell us what you know of what it was like to come out of hiding.
So my father heard all this commotion on the street, and he heard singing, and he opened actually the dormer window and looked out, and he looked back at us and he said, "I think it's over. I think we're free." So my brother and I had no idea what that actually meant. They tried to explain it, but miraculously there was one tin of cookies left, and my father was hungry at that time, ran to get this tin of cookies, And he stuffed his face and put the tin on the table and said, everybody can take as many as they want. Of course, my brother and I and my stomach were very little. So one
Mhm.
cookie we were full, but my brother said, "Mm, being free means eating cookies." But a couple of days after we were free, my parents took us outside. And when people ask me what is the most traumatic part that you remember, it's the first time to be outside and to be blinded by the sun. It was a very beautiful spring day, and my brother started crying. He wanted to go back upstairs. My parents tried to explain, but they did take us back upstairs. And then a couple of days later, we went back outside and we saw massive people. Amsterdam was liberated. There were military tanks. There were military Canadian soldiers. People were waving at them. People were just so glad to be outside. This is what we saw.
Mm.
And here we are crying till two Canadian soldiers came towards us. I have no idea what they were saying. We didn't speak English, but they gave us Hershey bars. Now, when the first time you eat chocolate, it's magic.
It's magic. Louisa, we have, yeah, if I could, along the same notion of what it was like to come out of hiding into being liberated and out in the open, we have a video question from a student named Ava Jane from Washington, D.C. Let's go ahead and hear Ava Jane's question of you, and I'll repeat it back when she finishes.
My name is Ava Jane Lee, and I'm from Washington, D.C. Thank you for sharing your story. My question for you is, what is one of the most difficult things you remember about your transition from being in hiding to the outer world after the war?
Ava Jane's asking, what is one of the most difficult things you remember about your transition from being in hiding to the outer world?
Uh, it's being outside and having no walls. So that safe feeling is kind of gone. But here are my parents. They're still there. They were the ones that were with us for the 2.5 years, almost 3 years, that we were in that place. So it's not as traumatic as you think it was
Mm,
because we were still together and my parents were just as loving as they had been before.
mm. Louisa, with the war over, you're liberated. You know that your parents know that they're safe now. How did your family get back on their feet in the aftermath of the devastation and loss that the Nazis had left behind?
So it's a country that is robbed of everything. It's empty. The buildings are dilapidated, they're not kept up. There's just nothing. So people had to get together and rebuild a country. What made people a lot of togetherness for people, and the jealousy about you're rich and you're poor and you have this and you have that wasn't there because everybody was really in the same boat. Now, for my parents, it was hard because there was no job for my father. What was left of the business that he had with his father was also four walls. The machinery, everything was taken to Germany.
Mm,
So my father was lucky he had done business with uh, somebody in Stockholm, Sweden. Sweden had been neutral, and he had become very good friends with this person, and this person offered him a job. So we actually moved for 2 years to Sweden, where my father was able to work, and my brother and I went to school. And then we had more children. They had more children after the war. But after 2 years, my grandfather asked my father to please come back. He had been approached by the government. The government had figured out who owned what before the war and asked the owners, if they were still alive, to really start their business again. The Netherlands needed an economy, they needed people to pay taxes. We had nothing. So my father and mother really wanted to go back to the Netherlands. So we went back in 1948. My father worked very, very hard for 5 years, and he made the business profitable again. He had some help from the Marshall Plan,
Mhm.
and he had some help not having to pay tax in the beginning, but then after that, he was taxed to unbelievable. But it was all to rebuild the country.
Mm. So, in your family, your father was able to really reestablish his life, but it took a very long time.
Right.
When, Louisa, do you recall at what age you began to understand the enormity of what had happened during the Holocaust and what the impact was on you and your family?
So when I had history in school, we learned about the world wars. We learned that there was a Second World War from 1940 to 1945. That's it. Nothing else. So we questioned my mother about different family members, and my mom would say that person hasn't come back. That's her answer for that person was murdered. She didn't say that that person hasn't come back. And most of people in Holland actually use that term. So we didn't talk about it at all. And my parents didn't want to talk to their children about it because they didn't want to bother us. And also about all the relatives that hadn't come back, but we didn't know. I became a physical therapist and I worked for a very large practice in Amsterdam. My specialty was cerebral palsy, and I did that in the afternoons. I worked with children. And during the mornings, I worked with general physical therapy practice. I had a lot of patients that were camp survivors, and they talked.
Hmm.
You talk, why isn't your shoulder working? What happened to it? And they would tell me what had happened to them in a camp. So that's how I slowly learned. But I learned very little. My parents didn't talk. My father didn't start talking till I became a volunteer at the museum, and that was in 1994.
1994.
And he had
Right.
5 more years, and then he passed away. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Louisa, we have another question from one of our viewers, and this question is from Brad. Brad asks, how have you been able to restore your faith in humanity? And if so, how?
Well, I didn't think about it.
Mhm.
I was a physical therapist, and then I married the love of my life, and we had a family, and that's what I wanted. And we had a very close knit family. My husband was drafted in the military, and we lived with the military for over 21 years, and we moved different places, and we were really close. I talked about it a little bit, but not really to the extent that I talk
Right.
now, ever since I really joined the museum as a volunteer.
Yeah. And that was, as you said, in the late 1990s. Yeah.
Actually, 1994. Yeah.
1994. When did you finally leave the Netherlands and move to the United States?
My husband was a medical student in Amsterdam. And when he was finished with his studies, we were married 2 years. I had a 5-week-old daughter, and we came here in 1967. Yes,
1967.
and he did his specialty training, and he was still drafted when he was finished.
All
Yeah.
right. But you remained in Holland for a very long time after the
Yes.
war. Yeah.
Yes. And if I hadn't met my husband, who was an American, I probably would have still be there. Yeah.
Still be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Louisa, we're coming towards the close of the program, and I do have one more question for you, and that is, as we face a dangerous surge in anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, please tell us why you feel it is so important to share your firsthand account of the Holocaust and what all of us can learn from it.
During the Holocaust, 1.5 million innocent Jewish children were murdered, not because they were bad. They were murdered because they were Jews. And people let it happen. Nobody stopped. Nobody stopped it. The Holocaust was genocide. And you would think when people learn about it, genocide would stop. nobody would want it anymore, but it never stopped. In the late 70s, we had genocide in Cambodia, 1992 in Bosnia, 1994 in Rwanda, and look in this age that we're living in now, this century. We have genocide in African countries. We have genocide in the Middle East, different tribes in Syria, in Iraq. There's genocide in Burma. There's genocide in China. People are singled out because they have a different religion, they have a different skin color, they dress differently, they have a different language. But people are people, and we have to respect one another. Hatred has no place in our society. And when it occurs, we have to speak up. We have to do something about it. We cannot continue. And that's why I'm speaking. And I'm hoping that people that are listening will help me. I can't do it alone. And I don't know how many more years I can speak. I need everybody's help to stand up against hatred. Not just stand up, but speak up. People are people, and we have to respect one another. The Holocaust did not start with killing, it started with hate, and then it resulted in killing. So, if we can stop the hatred, then maybe we can stop the killing.
Mm.
That's why I'm speaking.
Louisa, thank you for those closing remarks. They are so profound, and that is exactly why we need to listen to you and to the other Holocaust survivors we still have with us who share their stories. Thank you for that. I also am just so grateful to you helping to paint this picture of what life was like in a sort of in a cocoon for you as a child with your brother in that attic for 2.5 years in a world where you didn't know that it was different. And what that's all about is your remarkable parents. Yeah, you've painted a picture of two remarkable human beings whose love for their kids was so encompassing, and Selma's too, to protect you in the way that they did.
Right.
Louisa, thank you so much for being our first person today. We are so grateful to you, and I know you will continue talking for as long as you possibly can. And we are, as humans, we're all better for that. Thank you, Louisa.
I was glad to do it, and thank you very much, Bill.
Okay. I'd like to take a moment to thank our donor. First Person is made possible through the generous support from the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation. And I'd like to also invite all of you to come back and visit us again in September for our next First Person program. Thank you, everybody, wherever you are, for being with us today.